The day the stranger rode into town, the wind carried more than dust. It carried a promise that something was about to change. Folks in Red Creek had seen trouble before. Cattle thieves, card sharks, drifters with quick tempers and quicker triggers. But nothing quite like the sight that rolled down Main Street that afternoon. A tall iron cage sat on the back of a flat wagon, its wheels creaking under the weight. Inside the cage stood a black horse with eyes like burning coal, muscles tight as drawn wire. And beside that horse, wrists and ankles chained, stood the man they called the wildest cowboy in 3 territories. Some said he had broken horses no one else could touch. Others said he had broken men the same way. He was known for riding into towns without a word and riding out with someone's pride tucked under his belt. His hat was pulled low, shadowing a face weathered by sun and hard living. Even in chains, he did not look beaten. He looked like a storm waiting for the right wind. The crowd gathered fast. Shopkeepers stepped out from their doors. Ranch hands leaned against hitching posts. Children were pulled back by worried mothers. There was laughter too, though it was thin and nervous. It felt like the kind of laughter that comes before lightning strikes. The sheriff stood near the wagon, arms crossed over his vest. He looked tired. Not just the kind of tired that comes from chasing outlaws, but the kind that comes from knowing you have caught something you do not fully understand. He had roped the cowboy 3 nights earlier after a brawl that left half the saloon wrecked and 2 men nursing broken ribs. No one had died. That mattered in a place like Red Creek, but the damage was enough. The town council decided the man and his horse would be auctioned off to cover costs. Auctioning a man was not common, even in those rough years after the war. But the cowboy had no kin in town, no friends stepping forward with coin. And the horse, that fierce black stallion, was worth more than most ranches. Together they were a prize. The cage stopped in the center of town. The horse stamped, iron chains clinking against iron bars. The cowboy lifted his head slowly and looked out over the crowd. His gaze moved from face to face, steady and calm. There was no begging in it. No shame either. The auctioneer cleared his throat and climbed onto a crate. He spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. He talked about debts and damages, about law and order, about giving a wild man a chance to earn his keep under someone who could handle him. A few men in the crowd chuckled at that. They thought they could handle anyone in chains. Then the bidding started. Numbers were shouted out, rising slow at first. Most of the interest was for the horse. Ranchers admired the stallion's build, the strength in his legs, the fire in his eyes. A horse like that could change a man's fortune. The cowboy was seen as extra weight, trouble tied to muscle. Through it all, the man in the cage stayed silent. But once, when the horse tossed its head too hard and the chain bit into its neck, he stepped closer and pressed his shoulder gently against the animal's side. The stallion stilled. It was a small movement, almost missed in the noise, but those who saw it felt something shift. Just as the bidding climbed higher, a murmur spread from the edge of the crowd. People turned, some frowned, some stepped aside. She walked in without hurry, her boots steady on the wooden boards of the street. Her dark hair was braided and fell over one shoulder. A woven shawl rested across her back, bright patterns catching the sunlight. Her face was calm, but her eyes were sharp, taking in everything. She was not from Red Creek, though many had seen her pass through before, trading beadwork and leather goods, speaking little, observing much. There were whispers about her, that she came from a tribe pushed west beyond the hills, that she lived alone near the river, that she knew more about horses than any man in 3 counties. Some respected her skill. Others feared what they did not understand. She stepped closer to the wagon. The crowd parted without being asked. The auctioneer hesitated. He was not sure if she meant to bid. Women rarely did. And she was not the kind of woman most in town were used to listening to. Her gaze went first to the horse. The stallion's ears flicked forward. For a brief moment, the fire in its eyes softened. Then she looked at the cowboy. Their eyes met through the iron bars. It was not a long look, but it was deep, like 2 people measuring something without words. The bidding continued around them, numbers rising. A rancher with a thick mustache called out a high offer for the horse alone. Laughter rippled. The auctioneer was ready to bring down his hand and seal the deal. That was when she spoke. I'll buy him and his horse." Her voice was clear. Not loud, but steady enough to cut through the noise like a clean blade. The street fell quiet. The auctioneer blinked, unsure he had heard right. A few men laughed, thinking it a joke, but she did not smile. She reached into the leather pouch at her side and drew out a small cloth bundle. When she opened it, silver coins caught the light. She named a price that silenced every other bidder. It was more than the mustached rancher had offered, more than the council had hoped for. Enough to fix the saloon and then some. The sheriff studied her carefully. "You understand what you're buying," he said. "That one's trouble." Her eyes did not leave the man in chains. "So is a caged storm," she replied softly. The cowboy's jaw tightened at that, though whether in anger or surprise no one could tell. The councilmen whispered among themselves. Money was money, and no one else was matching her offer. At last the auctioneer nodded. "Sold." A strange feeling moved through the crowd. It was not joy, not exactly fear either. It was the sense that something unexpected had just taken root. The sheriff unlocked the cage door. The iron hinges groaned. He stepped inside carefully, as if entering a lion's den. The cowboy did not resist as the chains were adjusted, though his eyes never left the woman. When he was let out, the weight of the shackles dragged against the wooden boards. Up close, he looked even more formidable, broad shoulders, hands scarred from rope burns and rains, but there was something else too. A weariness, maybe, or a question. The woman stood her ground as he stopped before her. The townsfolk leaned in, hungry for drama. They expected shouting. Maybe a fight. After all, this was the wild cowboy who feared no man. Why would he bow to a woman who had just bought him like cattle? For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then she stepped closer and did something no one expected. She reached past him, not to touch him, but to rest her hand on the black stallion's neck. The horse exhaled slowly, pressing into her palm as if it had known her all its life. Gasps rose from the crowd. The cowboy's expression changed, just slightly. The hard edge in his eyes flickered. "You know horses," he said at last, his voice rough from dust and silence. "I know pain when I see it," she answered. The words hung in the air between them. Some of the men in town scoffed. They muttered that she would not last a week with him, that he would slip those chains and ride off before sunrise, that buying a wild man was like buying fire. But she did not argue. She simply handed the sheriff the coins and waited while the final locks were removed from the horse. The cowboy's shackles remained for the moment. The sheriff insisted on that, at least until they were outside town limits. As she took hold of the horse's reins, the stallion followed without resistance. The cowboy walked beside them, chains clinking with each step. The sun was lowering now, casting long shadows across Red Creek. Dust swirled around their boots as they moved toward the edge of town. No one stopped them. No one offered help. At the last building, the sheriff paused. "Once you cross that ridge," he said, "he's your responsibility." She nodded. The final shackle was unlocked. The iron cuffs fell away from the cowboy's wrists and hit the ground with a dull thud. For the first time since the cage door opened, he was free. The townsfolk held their breath. He rolled his shoulders slowly, feeling the weight gone. His eyes shifted from the open road to the horse, then to the woman who had bought him. There was 100 ways this could go. He could grab the reins and ride hard into the hills. He could turn back toward town and prove every warning true. He could walk away without a word. The wind picked up again, lifting dust into the fading light. She did not step back, did not reach for a weapon. She simply met his gaze and waited. The cowboy took one step toward her. And in that moment, when the whole town believed they knew exactly what kind of man he was, he made a choice that none of them saw coming. The cowboy took one step toward her. Every man in Red Creek stiffened. A few reached for their belts out of habit, even though no gun had been drawn. Dust swirled between them, catching the last gold light of evening. The black stallion lifted its head but did not pull away. He stopped close enough that only a breath of space stood between them. Up close, the lines in his face were clearer. He had the look of someone who had slept more under open sky than under a roof. His eyes were not wild now. They were searching. "You sure you know what you're doing?" he asked. "I am," she said. There was no challenge in her voice, no fear either, just certainty. He studied her for a long moment as if weighing something heavier than coin. Then he turned, not toward the town, not toward the open plains, but toward the narrow trail that led east along the river. It was the path few chose after dark. Gasps moved through the crowd. The sheriff let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding. Without another word, the cowboy reached for the stallion's mane and pressed his forehead briefly against the horse's neck. It was a quiet gesture, one meant only for the animal. Then he stepped back and nodded once to the woman. "You lead," he said. It was not submission, it was something else, a truce, maybe? She walked and he followed. The town watched until their shapes grew small against the fading sky. When they finally disappeared beyond the ridge, Red Creek seemed to exhale. Conversations burst out all at once. "He'll turn on her by morning. She's lost her mind. No woman can handle that man." But there were a few who said nothing. A few who had seen the way he paused before choosing his direction. A few who wondered if the story they had told about him was only half true. The trail east dipped toward the river, winding between cottonwood trees and tall grass that brushed against their boots. Crickets had begun their evening song. The air felt cooler away from town. They walked in silence for a time. The cowboy flexed his hands, still adjusting to the freedom of movement. His wrists were raw where the iron had rubbed. He did not complain, he did not ask where they were headed. But his eyes kept scanning the land, alert, measuring distances and shadows. "You could have ridden off," she said at last. "So could you," he replied. A faint smile touched her lips. "I had business in town. Now I have new business." He glanced at her. "Buying trouble is not good business." "Maybe I did not buy trouble," she said. "Maybe I bought a chance." He let out a low sound that might have been a laugh. "You do not know me. I know what I saw." "And what was that?" "A man who calmed a horse in a cage." He did not answer. The river came into view ahead, silver under the rising moon. Near its bend stood a small cabin made of rough timber. Smoke drifted lightly from a stone chimney. "That yours?" he asked. Yes, it was simple but sturdy. A corral stood nearby, built strong and high. Not the work of someone careless. As they approached, the stallion slowed, ears flicking. She opened the corral gate and led the horse inside. The cowboy watched closely, ready in case the animal bolted. But the stallion walked in calmly, turning in a slow circle before settling near the fence. "You've handled worse than him," he said quietly. "I have handled fear," she replied. "Fear looks the same in men and horses." He looked away toward the river. Inside the cabin, a lantern burned low. The space was neat. A small table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed against one wall, and shelves lined with dried herbs and simple tools. A rifle rested above the door, nothing fancy. Everything useful. She poured water into a basin and set it on the table. "Sit," she said. He hesitated only a second before lowering himself into the chair. Up close, the cuts on his knuckles and the bruises along his jaw were more visible. The fight in the saloon had not been small. She dipped a cloth into the water and handed it to him. "Clean that up." He took it but did not move right away. "You're not afraid I'll walk out?" "If you wanted to leave, you would have done it already." He held her gaze for a moment, then began wiping the dried blood from his hands. Silence filled the cabin, but it was not empty. It was thick with questions neither had voiced. After a while, he spoke. "They say things in towns. Most of them ain't true, I know. They say I break horses for sport. That I fight for fun?" She set another lantern on the table and lit it. The glow softened the hard lines of his face. "And what do you say?" she asked. He leaned back, studying the ceiling beams. "I say a horse ain't born wild. It's made wild when men try to crush it." Her eyes flicked to him. "My father taught me that," he went on. "He used to say you don't beat strength into something, you earn its trust. But after he died, I worked for men who did not believe that." The river outside rushed steady and calm. "You could have left," she said. "Left to where?" he asked. "Land's being fenced off. Ranchers pushing west. Every town the same. Folks want strong horses, but don't want to understand them. Same with men." There was no bitterness in his voice, just tired truth. She sat across from him. "Why the fight in the saloon?" His jaw tightened slightly. "They were talking," he said, "about your people. About how they should be driven farther out. About taking Riverland next." The words settled heavy in the room. "And you decided to defend strangers?" she asked. "I decided I'd heard enough. You could have walked away. So could they." For a moment, something like respect passed between them. Outside, the stallion stamped once, then grew still again. "You did not ask my name," she said. "Names carry weight," he replied. "Best to know if you plan to stay. And do you?" He did not answer that. She rose and stepped to the window, looking out at the moonlit corral. "That horse," she said softly. "He was not always yours." The cowboy stiffened slightly. "No, he was taken. Yes," she turned back to him. "From my cousin's herd." The air shifted. He did not reach for a weapon. He did not deny it. He simply met her gaze. "I did not steal him," he said. "I bought him off a trader who had no business owning him. And you believe that made it right?" "I believed I could give him better than a rope and a whip." She studied him carefully, searching for falsehood. She found none. "My cousin has been looking for that stallion for 2 years," she said. "He was bred for endurance, for the open plains. He carries bloodline older than this town." The cowboy nodded slowly. "I figured as much." "He's not like the others." Silence returned, heavier now. "So you knew," she continued. "You knew he did not belong to the trader." "I knew he belonged somewhere better," he said. "But I didn't know where. And now you do." He looked toward the window. The stallion stood tall under the moon, dark coat shining. "You going to take him back?" he asked. "That depends," she said. "On what?" "On whether you meant what you said about earning trust." He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "I never forced him," he said. "Never broke his spirit." "You saw that in the cage?" She had. That was why she had stepped forward in town. Not out of pity, not out of impulse, but because she had seen the way the stallion leaned into him despite the chains. "You could have told the sheriff," she said. "About the men in the saloon." "And have what happen?" he asked. "A fine? A warning?" "They just talk louder next time." The lantern flame flickered as a breeze slipped through the cracks in the cabin walls. "There are men in Red Creek who won't like what you did," she said. "Buying both of you? They didn't like me before. This is different." "How?" "You stood up when they insulted my people. Now they will think you chose a side." He gave a small, humorless smile. "Maybe I did." The weight of that choice hung between them. Outside, somewhere beyond the trees, a branch snapped. Both of them went still. The cowboy's head tilted slightly, listening. She moved to the door without panic, just caution. Through the small gap in the wood, she scanned the dark. "Could be deer," he murmured. "Could be," she said, but neither believed it fully. Red Creek was not far. Word traveled fast in small towns. And there were men there who did not take kindly to being embarrassed in public. She closed the door softly and slid the bolt into place. "You expect company?" he asked. "I expect consequences," she replied. He stood then, moving toward the rifle above the door. He paused before touching it. "Your house?" he said. She considered him for a moment, then nodded once. He took the rifle down carefully, checking the chamber with practiced hands. There was no rush in his movements. No wildness, only focus. "You still think buying me was good business?" he asked quietly. She stepped closer, her voice calm. "I did not buy you to own you," she said. "I bought you to change something, and what's that?" "The way this story ends." Before he could answer, another sound came from outside. This time it was clearer. The low murmur of voices carried faintly on the night air. Not one voice, several. The stallion shifted in the corral, uneasy. The cowboy's grip tightened on the rifle. She blew out one lantern, leaving the room half in shadow. "Looks like Red Creek ain't done with us," he said. "No," she replied, eyes steady on the door. "It's just getting started." The murmur outside grew louder, low voices carried on the river wind. Boots brushed against dry grass. A horse snorted somewhere beyond the trees. Inside the cabin, the lantern cast long shadows across the walls. The cowboy stood near the door, rifle steady but not raised. The woman moved to the small back window and looked out toward the corral. The black stallion paced along the fence, muscles tight, sensing the shift in the night. They did not waste time, the cowboy said quietly. No, she replied. Men who feel challenged rarely do. A fist struck the cabin door. Not hard enough to break it, hard enough to make a point. We know you're in there, a voice called out. It was thick, familiar. One of the ranch hands from town. Sheriff said you were cut loose. Don't mean we're finished. The cowboy's jaw tightened. Sheriff would not send them. He would not have to, she said. Pride is stronger than orders. Another knock, sharper this time. You hiding behind her now? The voice taunted. That the kind of savage you are? The word hung in the air, ugly and careless. The cowboy's grip on the rifle shifted, not from fear. From something deeper, she noticed. Do not give them what they came for, she said softly. They came for me. They came for a fight, she corrected. You choose whether they get one? Outside, a second voice joined in. Hand over the horse? That stallion don't belong with you. Town's got plans. The cowboy let out a slow breath. There it is. She stepped closer to him. They want the horse more than they want you. They want both, he said. A lesson and a prize? Another voice called out, calmer than the others. We ain't looking for trouble. Just want what's right. She recognized that one, the mustached rancher who had nearly won the auction. He had money, land, and a habit of believing he deserved more. The woman moved to the door but did not unbolt it. What's right? She called through the wood. A pause followed. The men outside were not expecting her voice. That horse was up for sale, the rancher answered. Town's business. You stepped in. I paid more than any of you, she said evenly. That is town business too? Boots shifted outside. A horse stamped impatiently. You bought trouble, another man muttered. I chose it, she replied. Inside, the cowboy watched her carefully. She stood straight, not raising her voice, not lowering it. There was strength in her stillness. The rancher cleared his throat. We don't want things to turn ugly. Just hand over the stallion. You can keep the man if you're so fond of him. A small, humorless smile touched the cowboy's lips. Generous, he muttered. She ignored that. The stallion was never yours. It ain't yours either, one of them shot back. He was taken from a trader fair and square. The cowboy's eyes hardened. That trader stole him, he said loudly enough to carry through the door. You all knew it. Silence followed. Not the silence of innocence, the silence of men caught between greed and truth. The rancher spoke again, voice losing some of its smoothness. Doesn't matter now. Paper was signed. Sale was legal. Legal ain't always right, she answered. There was a shuffle of movement outside, the soft metallic sound of something being adjusted. Not a weapon drawn, but a warning. Inside the cabin, the tension pressed close. The cowboy leaned slightly toward her. Back window leads where? To the river, she said. But if we run, they will chase. And if we stay? They will push, he nodded once. You got neighbors? Not close enough. The stallion in the corral let out a sharp whinny. A horse outside answered. They brought more than words, the cowboy said. The rancher's voice came again, this time firmer. Last chance. Hand over the reins and we'll ride back peaceful. She looked at the cowboy. In his face she saw anger, yes, but also restraint. He was not the reckless man they painted in town. He was thinking, weighing. This ain't about a horse, he said quietly to her. It's about control. They don't like what you did in front of everyone. I know. They don't like that I stood up in the saloon either. I know that too. Another knock hit the door, harder than before. The woman took a breath and unbolted it. The door opened just enough for her to step onto the small porch. The cowboy stayed just inside, rifle lowered but visible. 5 men stood in the yard. The rancher at the front, mustache bristling, 2 ranch hands behind him. Another man from the general store. And one younger face, barely more than a boy, eyes unsure. Lantern light from their horses cast flickering shadows across the grass. You made your point in town? The rancher said. Now we're making ours. You are on my land, she replied calmly. He looked around at the trees, the river beyond. Land's a tricky word these days, her gaze sharpened. It was not tricky before fences. The younger man shifted uncomfortably. The rancher took a step forward. We ain't here for a speech. We're here for that stallion. You know, he's worth more than that shack you're standing in. He could build up a breeding line. Strength like that shouldn't be wasted. Strength is not wasted when it is free, she said. A ranch hand scoffed. Free don't pay bills. From inside the cabin the cowboy spoke. Neither does fear. All eyes turned toward him. So you do talk, the rancher said. Thought maybe the chains took your voice. They took nothing, the cowboy answered evenly. The rancher studied him. You had your chance to ride off, why didn't you? The question hung there, more curious than mocking. The cowboy stepped onto the porch beside her. Because running don't fix what's broken, and what's broken? The rancher asked. He glanced at the woman briefly before answering. Men thinking they can take what ain't theirs and call it progress. The word progress sounded strange in that quiet clearing. The rancher's jaw tightened. Careful. Careful is how I've been living, the cowboy replied. You should try it. The tension crackled like dry wood near flame. Behind them, the stallion kicked at the corral fence, not to escape but in warning. The sound echoed through the night. The younger man finally spoke up. Maybe we should head back, he muttered to the rancher. Sheriff said no more trouble. The rancher shot him a look. Sheriff ain't here? He turned back to the porch. We're not asking again. The woman stepped forward slightly, placing herself half a step ahead of the cowboy. It was subtle, but deliberate. You want the stallion? She said. Then come at daylight, with the sheriff, with fair talk. And until then? The rancher asked. Until then, you ride away. A long pause followed. The men looked at one another. The rancher weighed his pride against the risk. 5 men against 2. But this was not town. This was riverland, open ground with too many shadows. The cowboy did not lift the rifle. He did not need to. At last, the rancher spat into the dirt. This ain't over, he said. You think buying him made you strong? It just made you a target. The words were meant for her, but his eyes flicked to the cowboy. We'll be back, one of the ranch hands added. They turned their horses slowly, not wanting to look like they were retreating. Hooves thudded against the earth as they rode off into the trees, lantern light fading. The clearing fell quiet again, but it was not peaceful quiet. It was waiting quiet. She closed the door and bolted it once more. The cowboy set the rifle back above the frame. They'll bring the sheriff, he said. Yes, and papers. And arguments. Yes, and if that don't work, she looked toward the corral. Then they'll try something else. He studied her face in the low light. You knew this would happen. I knew there would be a price. And you paid it anyway. She met his gaze. So did you. He did not deny it. The river kept moving outside, steady and unbothered by human disputes. After a while, he spoke again. If that stallion goes back to your cousin, I won't stop it. I have not decided that, she said. He belongs with his herd. He belongs where he is understood, she replied. That may still be here. A faint crease formed between his brows. You planning to keep me too? I am planning to see what you become when you are not caged, the word settled deep. He looked down at his hands, at the fading marks from iron. Men don't change easy. No, she agreed. But they can choose. Outside, an owl called from the trees. Why do you care? He asked finally. About any of this. She took a long breath. Because land is shrinking. Because voices are growing louder. Because if men like that rancher keep deciding what is right, there will be nothing left that is not owned or controlled. And you think I help that? I think you stand at a crossroads, she said. And crossroads matter, he gave a small nod, as if accepting a challenge he had not expected. In town, lanterns were likely still burning late, men talking in low tones about what had just happened. The sheriff would hear by morning, the council would debate. Some would argue law, others would argue strength. Here by the river, 2 people stood between worlds, between fences and open plains, between rumor and truth. The stallion finally settled, lowering his head to graze, but neither of them felt settled. They'll come in daylight, he said again. Yes, and daylight don't always make things clearer, she looked at him steadily. No, sometimes it only shows how divided we already are. The night stretched on, heavy with unanswered questions, and somewhere beyond the dark line of trees, plans were already being made. Morning came slow and pale over the river. A thin layer of mist hovered above the water, turning the world soft and gray. The woman had not slept much, neither had the cowboy. They had taken turns sitting by the door, listening for hoofbeats that never came during the night. But daylight brought its own kind of pressure. From the cabin window, she could see the stallion standing tall in the corral, dark coat shining under the early sun. He looked calm but alert, like he knew the day would test him. The cowboy stepped outside first, scanning the tree line. His movements were steady, controlled. No sign of the reckless brawler the town liked to describe. He walked to the corral and rested his forearm along the top rail. The stallion stepped closer, nudging his shoulder. "You ready for another show?" He murmured to the horse. The woman joined him a moment later. "It will not be a show," she said. "It will be a test." "For who?" he asked. "For all of us." They did not have to wait long. The sound of wagons and horses carried across the ridge before the sun had fully climbed. Not 5 men this time, more. The weight of it could be heard in the rhythm of hooves and wheels. The cowboy straightened. "They brought the town. Not all," she said quietly, "but enough." When the first riders came into view, the sheriff rode at the front. His face was set in a hard line, but there was no anger in it, just responsibility. Behind him came the rancher and several others, including the younger man from the night before. A small wagon followed, likely carrying members of the town council. They stopped a short distance from the cabin. No one rushed forward. No one reached for a weapon. But the air felt tight, stretched thin. The sheriff dismounted first. "Morning," he called out. "Morning," she replied, stepping forward. The cowboy stayed by the corral gate, close enough to act if needed, far enough to show he was not looking for a fight. The sheriff removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "I was hoping last night was just talk," he said. "Seems it wasn't." The rancher swung down from his horse. "We're here lawful," he said. "No trouble if there don't have to be?" The sheriff gave him a look that suggested patience was wearing thin. Then he turned back to the woman. "They're claiming that stallion was traded legal and proper," he said. "Got a paper with a mark on it." "A stolen mark," the cowboy said from behind. The sheriff glanced at him. "You got proof of that?" "I got sense," the cowboy answered. "Trader had no herd, no brand records." "Just a rope and a lie," murmurs moved through the group. The rancher stepped forward, holding up a folded paper. "Bill of sale," he said. "Signed by the trader and witnessed in Dry Hollow." "Dry Hollow don't ask many questions," the cowboy muttered. The sheriff looked tired again. "This ain't about Dry Hollow. It's about keeping peace here." She stepped closer. "Peace built on theft is not peace," she said. The rancher's jaw tightened. "There's no theft. Horse was sold. Then you bought him in auction. That makes him town property until payment clears all claims." "Payment cleared last night," she replied calmly. "In front of witnesses?" One of the councilmen cleared his throat from near the wagon. "There is still dispute about origin." The younger man shifted his weight. He looked at the stallion, then at the cowboy. Something in his expression had changed since the night before. The sheriff raised a hand. "Enough arguing in circles. We're going to settle this simple." He looked at the woman. "You claim the horse belonged to your cousin's herd. Can he prove it?" "Yes," she said. "Brand is faint, but it's there. On the inside of the left hind leg." All eyes turned toward the stallion. The rancher frowned. "That horse don't carry any clear brand. It was burned light," she said. "For endurance stock? So it would not scar thick." The cowboy opened the corral gate slowly. The stallion did not bolt. He stepped forward with steady confidence. "Careful," the sheriff warned. "He won't kick?" the cowboy said quietly. "Not unless pushed." He ran a hand along the stallion's flank, speaking low to him. The horse relaxed under his touch. Slowly, he guided the animal to turn slightly, lifting the hind leg just enough for inspection. The group leaned forward. There it was. Faint but visible, a curved mark, worn by time but unmistakable. The rancher's face darkened. "That don't prove nothing." "Could be any mark." "It is our mark," she said firmly. "My cousin can testify." "And where is he?" the councilman asked. 2 days east." A ripple of impatience moved through the men. The rancher looked at the sheriff. "We ain't waiting 2 days on a maybe." The sheriff rubbed his jaw. "Maybe we do. You'd hold up business over this? The rancher snapped. I'd hold up trouble, the sheriff replied evenly. The tension shifted again, not just between the cabin and the town, but within the town itself. The cowboy stepped forward, standing beside the woman now. You want proof? He said. Send a rider, bring her cousin. If the mark's false, I'll hand over the reins myself. The rancher laughed shortly. And if you don't come? He'll come, she said. The younger man finally spoke. I can ride, he offered, voice uncertain but clear. I know the Eastern Trail, the rancher shot him a sharp look. You don't volunteer without thinking. I am thinking, the young man replied. If we're right, we prove it. If we're wrong, we fix it. The sheriff watched this exchange closely. Something was changing in the group. The rancher folded the paper slowly. And what stops you from running while he's gone? He asked, pointing at the cowboy. The cowboy met his gaze. If I wanted to run, I wouldn't be standing here. Silence again. The sheriff made a decision. We wait, he said. One rider goes east. Rest of us ride back. The rancher opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. Pushing harder now might make him look unreasonable in front of the others. This ain't finished, he said instead. It will be, the sheriff answered. The younger man mounted up quickly, almost eager to move. He nodded once toward the woman before turning his horse eastward, dust kicking up behind him. The rest of the group lingered a moment longer. The rancher stepped closer to the porch, lowering his voice so only she and the cowboy could hear. You think this is about a horse? He said. It's bigger than that. Town's growing. Land's getting divided. Men like him don't fit in what's coming. The cowboy did not react outwardly, but his eyes sharpened. And men like you? She asked. We build what's coming, the rancher replied. He turned and walked back to his horse. The group rode off, leaving the clearing quiet once more. But this quiet felt different. It carried a clock inside it, ticking down the hours until the rider returned. The cowboy let out a slow breath. You trust that boy? He asked. I trust that he wants truth, she said. And truth don't always sit well with folks. No, she agreed. They spent the rest of the morning in restless waiting. The cowboy repaired a loose board in the corral. She gathered water and checked supplies. Every sound from the ridge made them glance up. By afternoon, clouds rolled in from the west, dark and heavy. Thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. A storm was building, slow but certain. Good timing, the cowboy muttered. Storm will make tempers worse, or clear the air, she said. As the first drops of rain began to fall, a distant shape appeared on the eastern trail. Not one rider, two, the young man rode in front, soaked and leaning low over his horse's neck. Behind him rode another figure, straight back despite the weather. Even from a distance, there was strength in the way he held the reins. Her cousin, the cowboy watched carefully. Looks like your proof came riding. The rain thickened, turning the ground slick and dark. Before they could reach the cabin, another sound broke through the storm. Hooves from the west, fast, too fast. The rancher and several men were returning as well, riding hard. They don't plan to wait polite, the cowboy said. The clearing filled quickly with riders from both directions. Rain poured down, blurring lines and faces. The cousin dismounted near the corral without hesitation. His eyes found the stallion immediately. Recognition flashed across his face. He stepped forward, rain dripping from his hair, and spoke a single word in his own tongue. The stallion lifted his head sharply and answered with a deep, familiar sound. Every man in the clearing felt it. The rancher rode in close, mud splashing. This ain't a circus, he snapped. Show us proof. The cousin moved to the stallion's side and pointed to the faint brand. Even in rain it was visible. The sheriff leaned in, squinting through water and tension. Thunder cracked overhead. The cowboy stood shoulder to shoulder with the woman now, rain soaking through his shirt, eyes fixed on the rancher. This is where you decide, she said quietly to him. He nodded once. The rancher looked around at the gathered men, at the sheriff, at the proof in front of him. His jaw worked as pride and pressure collided. Rain fell harder, drumming against the earth. No one moved. The storm roared above them, and the future of more than just one horse hung in the balance. Thunder rolled across the sky as the sheriff straightened up from the stallion's hind leg. Rain streamed down his face, mixing with dust and doubt. For a long moment he said nothing, and that silence felt heavier than the storm. "It's there," he finally said. "Brand matches what she described." The cousin stepped forward, placing his palm gently against the stallion's neck. The horse leaned into the touch without fear. It was not a trick. It was recognition. Years of distance did not erase bloodline or memory. The rancher's shoulders went stiff. Could have been burned after, he argued, but his voice lacked the same force it carried before. The sheriff looked at him steadily. "You know that ain't true." Rain beat harder against hats and coats. The men from town shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. What had felt like a sure claim an hour ago now felt thin. The younger rider spoke up, breathless from the long ride. "I saw the herd," he said. "Same mark on 3 marais, faint, but same shape." "It's theirs." The clearing went quiet except for the storm. The rancher glanced around, searching for support. He found none strong enough to stand on. Pride kept him upright, but truth had already taken root. The cowboy did not say a word. He stood beside the woman, rain dripping from his hat brim, hands relaxed at his sides. He was not looking for victory. He was waiting for what came next. The sheriff made the call. "Horse goes back to rightful herd," he said. "That settles it." The words landed like a gavel strike. The rancher exhaled sharply through his nose. "And what about him?" he asked, nodding toward the cowboy. "He still stirred up trouble. Still swung first in that saloon." The sheriff held his gaze. "Saloon's been paid for. No one pressed charges. And I ain't seen him draw on anyone since. That don't mean he's changed." The woman stepped forward, her voice calm despite the rain. "Change is not something you see in one day," she said. "It is something you choose again and again." The sheriff looked at the cowboy. "You choosing different now?" The storm seemed to pause for his answer. "Yes," the cowboy said simply. No big speech, no promise of perfection. Just a choice. The cousin turned to him then, studying him closely. For a heartbeat, the tension between them could have turned sharp. After all, the stallion had been gone for 2 long years. But the cousin saw what others had begun to see. The horse stood calm at the cowboy's side, not afraid, not broken. "You cared for him?" the cousin said quietly. "I did," the cowboy answered. "You did not know he was ours." "I knew he was stolen," he replied. "I just didn't know from who," the cousin gave a slow nod. "You could have sold him for more than you paid." "I could have, but you did not." "No." The rain began to soften, the worst of the storm passing overhead. The cousin placed both hands on the stallion's neck and closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, something had shifted. "He comes home with me," he said. "But you are welcome to ride with us." A ripple moved through the crowd. The rancher scoffed. "After all this?" The cousin did not look at him. "A man who protects a horse in a cage is not our enemy." The cowboy looked at the woman, surprise flickering across his face. She met his gaze steadily. "You stood at a crossroads," she said softly. "You chose?" The sheriff mounted his horse again. "Then that's that," he declared. "Town rides back. This matter's closed." One by one, the men turned their horses. The rancher lingered a moment longer, rain dripping from his mustache. He looked at the stallion, then at the cowboy. "You made a scene in town," he said. "Cost me money." The cowboy met his stare without heat. "I cost you a lie?" The rancher's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. He swung into his saddle and rode off with the others, leaving the clearing quieter than it had been all day. As the last rider disappeared over the ridge, the sun broke through the thinning clouds. Light spilled across the wet grass and glistened on the river. The stallion shook himself, water spraying in a silver arc. The cousin turned to the woman. "You did what many would not," he said. "It needed doing," she replied. He nodded, then looked again at the cowboy. "You are welcome to ride east with us, help rebuild what was taken. Or you may stay here and build something new. Choice is yours." The offer hung in the air. The cowboy looked toward the open plains, then back at the cabin, then at the woman. For the first time since he rode into Red Creek in chains, his face looked lighter. "I've been running most my life," he said slowly, "from bad employers, from bad choices, from towns that wanted me one day and not the next." He glanced at the stallion. Maybe it's time I ride toward something instead, the woman smiled faintly. East or here? He took a breath, feeling the weight of it settle right. Here, he said. The cousin studied him for a moment longer, then gave a single nod of respect. Then you ride with us for a few days, he said. Help settle him back with the herd. After that you return, not as a caged man. As a neighbor, the word neighbor felt new in the cowboy's mouth. He had not been called that in a long time. I can do that, he said. The days that followed were steady and honest. The cowboy rode east with the cousin and a small group from the herd. The stallion moved like he had found a missing piece of himself, strong and proud among familiar mares. There was no dramatic farewell, no sudden break, just the quiet work of guiding a horse home. When the cowboy returned to the river cabin, he did not come alone. The cousin rode with him, bringing 2 younger colts to train, not to break, but to guide. Word traveled fast back to Red Creek. At first, the town watched from a distance. They expected trouble. They expected the old story to repeat itself. Instead, they saw something different. They saw the so-called savage cowboy riding into town without chains, hat tipped in quiet greeting. They saw him refuse a bar fight with a simple shake of the head. They saw him work long hours in open fields, teaching horses with patience instead of force. They saw the native woman standing beside him, not behind. They saw her trade fairly in town, speaking with calm strength that did not bend under old prejudice. Even the sheriff noticed. One evening, weeks later, he stopped by the river cabin. The sun was setting warm and gold over the water. The sound of horses moving in the corral carried easy and peaceful. You've changed the feel of this place, the sheriff said, leaning on the fence. Place was always like this, she replied. People just needed to see it. The cowboy adjusted a saddle strap on one of the colts. Town's changing too, he said. The sheriff nodded. Slowly, the rancher never apologized. Pride does not loosen that easy. But he stopped pressing claims that were not his. He stopped calling the cowboy savage in public. That alone felt like progress. The younger rider who had gone east began visiting often, learning about horse training and herd care. He asked questions instead of making assumptions. Red Creek did not become perfect overnight. Fences still went up, land was still argued over. But something important had shifted. A man once chained in a cage stood free by choice. A horse once treated as property ran strong in rightful land. And a woman who refused to be ignored proved that courage does not need to shout. On a clear evening months later, the cowboy and the woman stood by the river, watching the stallion graze in the fading light. The air smelled of grass and water. You ever regret buying trouble? He asked lightly. She smiled. I did not buy trouble, she said. I bought a chance. He looked at her, understanding now in a way he had not before. Guess we both did, he said. The river moved steady beside them, carrying away old storms and reflecting new light. In a land where stories were often written in conflict, this one had turned toward something better. Not because the world changed in a single day, but because 2 people chose not to let it stay the same.